meeting,
Yes.
one time a year, I don't want to lose out.
Oh, take the power, hit that guy.
Okay, we all set? I will call this meeting to order. According to town charter, the select board shall meet within 14 days of the annual meeting for the purpose of organizing and electing a chair and vice chair and adopting rules of transaction. And the charter also states that the town manager shall preside at the organizational meeting prior to the election of the chair. As I've said in the past, it offers no guidance on, however, as to what the manager should do while presiding. And I've always kind of taken
Charming approach.
taken the extra time to offer words of wisdom, although this board is, of course, a very experienced board and it has many years of wisdom wrapped up in the members here. I want to start by welcoming Terry and Joy back to the board, although you never really had an interim break. But Joy, you're starting your third year, as I understand it.
I am.
And Terry's got you beat, though. He's starting his 17th year on the board. And of course, while serving on the board, it gives you all an opportunity to learn all kinds of interesting things and facts. And tonight's going to be no exception. There's an interesting array of topics on the agenda. But I want to start us off with a couple of facts of my own. First, I was wondering if you knew that when Terry McCaig first ran for select board, he lost by 28 votes.
Jeff Ferris.
Ow.
Sorry about that.
You've never forgiven him, have you?
It was a blizzard that day.
Terry ran a year later, and a contested election won by 993 votes. Can anyone guess or remember who he ran against in that election?
Chris Roy? No?
It was someone that's not been active. His name was Michael Feehan.
Counselor.
Another interesting fact that has nothing to do with those facts, and it has to do with the phrase "close but no cigar." Does anyone have any idea where that phrase came from originally?
Carnivals.
Carnivals, right? That's right. Ted knows the answer. If I had a prize, I'd give it to you.
Do I get a cigar?
Well, to fill that out a little bit, in the 19th century, they had carnival games, much like they have now, but they were geared more towards adults. And so instead of stuffed animals, they often gave out cigars. And so, and they obviously were targeted towards adults. And so the guy running the game, if you lost, he might say, or she might say, well, it's probably a man in most cases in that time. But anyway, he might say, well, close, but no cigar. And that's how the phrase got its start. So anyway, enough of all that. I think it's now time to call for nominations for the chair of Select Board. And so I will entertain such a motion.
I move to nominate Terry McCaig as chair of the select board.
I would second that.
So the motion's been made and seconded to nominate Terry McCaig as the chair of the Select Board. So I will call for a vote. All those in favor? Oh, I should ask, are there any other nominations? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I don't hear anyone. So Terry, my duty is done.
Short-lived.
It was fun while it lasted.
Thank you, Rick. So next on the agenda is then to elect the vice chair. Are there any nominations for the office of vice chair?
You still in? I move to-
I nominate Jeff Ferris for vice chair.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any other nominations for vice chair? If not, all those in favor of electing Jeff Harris as vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
One abstention.
Don't have to.
Do you have to abstain?
No.
I doubt it, but
No.
just thought it was appropriate.
All right. So we'll move on to the minutes of February 20th, 2018. And is there a motion?
Move to approve the minutes of February 20th, 2018 with any amendments thereto.
Is there a second?
Second.
Page 1. Page 2.
I'll be honest, it was so long ago. I was in trouble.
Yeah. It's different when we're not meeting weekly, isn't it?
It's true, good point.
Page 3. Just had one thing under item number 10, the town manager's report, second bullet. It talks about a charter change will likely be proposed to change the town clerk and town treasurer from elected positions to appointed, but I think it would be an opportunity for the town to have a vote to decide whether or not the town clerk and treasurer should be elected.
I agree.
That's correct. That's
true.
Yeah.
Yes. Page 4.
I actually thought that I had wanted to delay going into executive session until Ted was present on 12, so I don't recall making that motion.
Actually, you
thought-
did.
I did? I
Yeah.
apologize. There we go.
Hearing no other corrections to the minutes, all those in favor of approving the minutes of February 20th, 2018, say aye.
Aye.
And one abstention, Ted.
Abstain.
And we'll go on to public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to make any public comment on any item either on or not on the agenda? Seeing no hands raised, we'll move on to the select board rules on transaction and meeting schedule. Rick, do you want to just briefly tell us about that?
Oh, this is actually identical to the rules of transaction the board adopted last year. This is, it lays out the set of rules that the board operates on during the course of the year, and one of the attachments is the meeting schedule. And the meeting schedule, again, follows pretty much the same schedule we have this year. The first and third Tuesdays, except in December and January, when we have more meetings because of budget. This, by the way, this can be changed during the course of the year. It's not absolutely set in stone.
As we have done in the past. Any questions for Rick regarding either the rules or the attachment A? If not, a motion would be in order.
I'd move to adopt the select board rules of transaction and meeting schedule dated March 20th, 2018, the term of the current select board ending in March 2019.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No abstentions? All right.
If I may interrupt for a moment, as we adopt some of these things, we're going to be passing along the copies for signature, just so you know.
That would be fine. So I will pass those on. I'll pass these back. Next is to designate for examining and allowing claims. And as you may recall, we've done this in the past years, and for quite a number of years, Jeff Ayers has been the person to be the first one in charge of doing that. I was doing that as an alternate for many years, and I think in the past year, Terry Zitrich offered to do that. Volunteers for the alternate, well,
I would.
either for one, either for the first or the second signers.
I'll serve as an alternate.
Jeff, are you willing to serve?
I would be happy to defer to Joy on that. I'm happy to do it, but I'm also happy if somebody
Well,
else
I'm
is.
happy to serve as your alternate if you
Oh,
like.
okay, I get your point.
Sorry.
Sure. Sounds good.
Any other volunteers who may wish to do that? Well, all the rest of us are sort of in line to do that if the first two are not available. So I believe that requires a motion.
It says a suggested resolution is included with the agenda packet.
It's just the resolution is this, yes. So a motion to approve the resolution with the two individuals named would be in order.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Very clear.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We're moving on to the Catamount license agreement. I think Eric is going to talk about
Mr. Chair,
this. Yes.
maybe it's a point of order. If we do public comment?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I missed it. I'm sorry.
There were very few comments. I think, is Eric going to talk about the Catamount license?
No, actually, we have Melinda, and I don't
Melinda's.
know, do we have others coming?
Kate is coming, I told her 7:15, so she, but I can certainly get started.
Good, welcome, Melinda.
So as you know, for the past year and a half, the town has been working with the Trust for Public Land to acquire the proposed Catamount Community Forest. As part of that process, it's been the mutual understanding and desire of the town and the McCulloughs to, that the outdoor center would continue to operate their programs and maintain the 20-mile trail system out there, so that town residents and visitors can continue to enjoy these amenities with limited additional allocation of resources from the town. So after many months of negotiation and many drafts of agreements, we feel we've negotiated an agreement with the outdoor center that is fair and reasonable. I've provided you the draft agreement and also the memo summarizing the different sections of the agreement. If you would like, I can go through the entire agreement, or if you know particular sections that you'd rather focus on, either way, your preference, your choice.
Any particular item that you wish to question on this license thing?
Can I ask that we just kind of go through and maybe hit the high points on each section, kind of
Sure.
the major terms that we would be interested in
Yeah.
for the town?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Melinda, before we get started, I have one question that isn't necessarily about the agreement itself. It's more about the process. And my question is along the lines of, I have my personal preferences about Catamount Outdoor Center and whether, they could do a good job running it. But the question has to do with, is it appropriate? I don't know how to exactly ask the question, so let me muddle through it. Is it appropriate for the town to, in a sense, only negotiate with one entity? For instance, we have procurement policies and we have to go get, at least 3 bids, that type of thing. And
Right.
so this is asking the question of, is this the appropriate mechanism to choose, if you will?
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah, I can chime in, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at this point, because of the property owner, we don't have really any choice, as I understand it.
So,
Is that?
so, yeah, so, as part of the terms of the option agreement with Trust for Public Land.
Okay.
There was an understanding that the McCulloughs basically wanted this transfer to basically be contingent on the outdoor center continuing to be the entity that runs their programs until they no longer want to do that.
And subject to the terms of
And
license.
subject to the terms of the license agreement.
So if I were to kind of rephrase that, if the select board were to, let's say, object, just totally hypothetically, that could put this whole deal in jeopardy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I didn't realize, I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't realize that's what this was about. So they're basically setting conditions down upon which we would secure the property for the town that says the only way we're going to transfer this to the town is if we have the Catamount Outdoor Family Center organization run it?
Right, again, according to terms and conditions of the license agreement, which is why you're reviewing it now, way ahead, well,
Yeah.
not so way ahead, but ahead of
Yeah, okay.
when we plan to have the closing.
Why would we want this? Because does that take, I guess because I haven't read through all the details here.
Well, frankly, my preference would not to be having this
Exactly.
condition.
Exactly.
But and that's not the deal that we're handed, basically.
So,
Okay.
okay, I've got the answer here. And then when we do get to, there's a section in here that talks about, hey,
Hi, sorry I'm late. Rushed through that agenda, eh?
We're very fast.
we didn't try to avoid, that wasn't the purpose.
So perhaps now is the time for her to go through item by item.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
And you might, I'm sorry for interrupting, you might want to refer to her memo of March 13th.
yeah,
'Cause
so,
I think she'll be using that to go through the items.
right, so if you have,
Okay, all right.
so the first section just basically states the whole purpose of the license agreement. Basically, a license for Catamount Outdoor Family Center to use the property network for recreational educational purposes. That have to be, and this is important, that are consistent with the conservation easement. So that is repeated at several times throughout the agreement, that everything's got to be consistent with the conservation easement. Yes.
I'm sorry. I hope you don't mind me interrupting.
Not at all.
I think I've done it twice already tonight. Could you explain, just real briefly, the conservation easement versus the land that the town is going to actually own?
So the conservation easement is what are terms that are basically established for the protection of the property and held by the Land Trust and Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And the purpose of the conservation easement is so the land will be perpetually protected for free public access and recreational values and natural resource values.
So just briefly restate, my understanding. Town owns the land, and on top of what the town owns in terms of property is this conservation easement, which establishes the criteria in which the town will,
Yeah, that,
for lack of better words, operate, own the land.
that's correct, and that would be similar to other town properties like Mud Pond Country Park and et cetera.
Okay, good, thanks.
Sure. So the term of the license would be 10 years, and that would be renewable upon mutual agreement of the town and the outdoor center. There are provisions to terminate the agreement earlier if either party is not holding up their side of the agreement. Basically, we wouldn't be charging the outdoor center a fee to use the property.
So because of my previous comment about, why was there only one entity? So the town, if it is unhappy with how Catamount Outdoor Center is managing or taking care of its end of the agreement, or we come to the conclusion is not living up to their end of the agreement, we have the ability to terminate.
That's correct. And I'll talk about that later
Okay.
on in the agreement.
I'd like to comment on the 10-year piece. We argued rather strenuously for a 5-year term.
Yes.
I was actually thinking
Yeah.
the same.
And we kind of reached a stalemate to a certain extent. And their argument for a 10-year versus 5-year was that they plan to make investments. And those investments, if they make them early in the contract, 5 years isn't enough time to really recover
Yep.
their investments. So that's why they're arguing for a 10-year.
Do you mind if I just chime in with one other? And they also pointed out that when applying for grant funding, a lot of funders like to see a relatively long license term agreement, so.
And is that sort of standard for these types of agreements, 10 years?
It varies widely, and actually, one example I have is, are you familiar with the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail?
Yes, actually.
So-
Well, familiar with it physically, not how it's.
Right, so in that case, VAST has developed the rail trail. It has an agreement, a license to use the rail corridor with V-Trans, and the term of that, I believe, is 20 years or 25 years. It might even be longer. So, it's not uncommon to have that length of term.
Good, thanks.
Sure.
A lot of Vermont Mountain Biking Association, when they work with private landowners and sometimes towns for licensees, or that they use a 10-year agreement because of the amount of time, volunteer time and costs that the group puts into creating and maintaining the trails, and they kind of don't want that stripped from under them after just a year or two, or 4 or 6.
Okay, and would that be similar with the Heinsberg Town Forest? Would you know?
Heinsberg Town Forest doesn't have a license agreement
okay.
with the Fellowship of the Wheel.
No, they don't. They have,
Okay.
I think they have a memorandum of agreement or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. I just hold that up as an example of, I think, a successful town ownership of a town forest with recreational uses on it. So that was why that question.
Okay. So, under permitted uses, all uses of the property have to adhere to the conditions of the conservation easement and the community forest management plan, which is being worked on right now. And the outdoor center would be responsible for maintaining and improving the trails within the 20-mile trail network, as well as maintaining any structures that it uses on the property. And there are some restrictions around when trees can be removed and and the construction of new trails. Both of those things, unless the only tree removal that's allowed is hazard trees or trees that are fallen over trails or in danger of falling over trails. Other than that, they would have to get permission from the town and the land trust to remove any trees or construct new trails.
The maintenance of the 7 bridges, are you comfortable, I guess the best way to ask that is, are you comfortable that that's a workable?
Yes.
The way it read here is it sounded a little, for lack of better words, loose.
Okay, yeah, so the town has agreed to take responsibility, meaning we will pay for the materials to construct those 7 bridges, and the outdoor center will assist by providing their labor and equipment to construct they're foot bridges, they're not like major river or stream crossings.
Okay.
And just to add a point on that is, at least some of those, we have a outstanding grant application to Vermont Recreation Trails Grant Program to cover some of the costs of that. So if
Nice.
if the Kanima Outdoor Family Center and the town is successful with that grant, then it's not going to come out of your budget.
Okay.
And that was for 19,000 and change.
Sounds like they're going to be nice bridges.
Well, that also included, the grant also included other bridges that they wanted to build. Besides these 7 structures, they had like some short structures over ditches and whatnot.
Okay.
So. And then after the initial upgrades to those bridges are done, the outdoor center would be responsible for maintaining those crossings in good repair. So the second section of under maintenance talks about a development of an annual maintenance plan, which will be done cooperatively between the town and the outdoor center, basically covering the trail network and any areas that are used by the outdoor center. And the way that plan would work is in the fall, I believe it's October, town staff, one town staff person, maybe, probably myself, will take a walk around the trail system with a representative of the outdoor center, and we will, talk about what improvements they want to make, and then they will submit a maintenance plan to the town, which then gets reviewed and approved and adjusted if necessary. And then once that town plan, the maintenance plan has been approved by the town, then they have a certain amount of time to conduct that maintenance. They have like a year or so to conduct that maintenance and complete the. And then C is just, trail maps will be readily available to the public. And any maintenance and construction needs to adhere to trail best management practices. There are various manuals that are out there and available for, that detail those best management practices. And specifically, no trail maintenance activities will be allowed which would degrade water quality, and that's also a condition in the conservation easement as well.
I question the ability of the COFC to create usable maps, but given
I think they're getting some help
how
from,
many times I've been lost on the property, but anyway, that's
Were you successful
besides.
with
With the-
UVM?
oh, well, they are helping them with signage, and I was out there this afternoon before I came to this meeting doing some skiing, and I noticed a lot of new signage around, so I was pleased to see that.
A start, at least, yeah. On number D, and please bear in mind that this is the world I work in a little bit, is this concept of forest land is a potential source of nutrients to Lake Champlain. So
Right.
these kind of, could become a sticky point down the road. If somebody has to implement some sort of forest management to minimize runoff, minimize nutrients, sediment, I don't know the lay of the land well enough to know what the potential there is, but any thoughts on that? I mean, this is not a showstopper by any chance.
Right.
I just am more curious when I saw that, no activity shall.
Yeah, and specifically, when you look at the language in the agreement, basically says there shall be no manipulation of natural water courses, wetlands, or other water bodies, nor shall there be any activities conducted on the property which would be detrimental to water quality, except as minimally necessary to carry out the uses permitted on these lands under this agreement and the conservation easement. So I think what that says is that, we're making every effort that we can to be really conscious of how the trail construction could have a negative impact on water quality, and to try and mitigate those impacts whenever and wherever possible, and just to be really conscious about that.
Okay, good, thanks.
And one advantage of this property is it's not too steep. Sometimes you get, a lot of erosion when you've got particularly steep trails and water starts running down them. And while there are some areas of slope on the property compared to a lot of other mountain biking networks, this is pretty flat.
Boy, I was just going to add, as a mountain biker, I find it plenty steep at times.
Yeah. So section 6, the community forest plan and conservation easement. So this just describes the process for if there are amendments to the community forest plan that may restrict the uses of the outdoor center, and how that's going to be negotiated so that this agreement is consistent with the plan, and vice versa, the plan is consistent with this agreement. And informational signs, that just says, you know, that it's okay to have informational signage on the property, as long as it's, you know, described under the annual plan, and it's in compliance with all applicable regulations. And also and I mentioned grant funding requirements because the federal community forest grant does require us to have some signage about civil rights, compliance with civil rights. It's kind of I don't know, seems like an odd little thing, but they specify what type of wording we're supposed to use and that we're supposed to have signage, so. Outdoor center is responsible for utilities, their use of the property. So section 9, use for general and special events, this provides a process for cooperation between the town and the outdoor center around scheduling special events on the property. So
It says the town must approve whatever is proposed by this.
that's correct. So the town has the authority to vet all the special events that are proposed and to approve those special events, which also need to be consistent with the conservation easement.
Oh, so maybe I'm reading it wrong. So I'm reading it that the town must approve whatever the COFC submits to them. You're saying the town must approve them as, it's kind of a play on words.
approval by the town, no, it's at the discretion of the town whether to approve.
That's what I was,
Yeah,
okay.
I understand your point.
So the town has a right to, has the right of refusal or the.
Right, that's correct, yeah.
However, you attorneys might say that.
Yeah,
Yeah, the discretion, not the obligation.
Town's discretion or, okay. It'd be better to word that, maybe.
This is just a memo. That's-
yes, I
Oh,
apologize.
yeah, okay, got it, that's,
The wording is confusing in the memo, I apologize for
thank
that.
you.
So, yeah, and so the town can also suggest its own events, and, you know, through a cooperative process, the town and the outdoor center can agree on additional events that the town may add to the.
So you haven't really talked about usage and how the property will be used and who dictates how the property will be used. Is that entirely now with the COFC and not at all with the town? Is that what this?
So the management plan will, that is going to cover the usage, how the property is used primarily
It's drafted by the COFC.
by the town committee, by the Catamount Community Forest Committee that was appointed by the select board earlier last year.
Okay.
Well, actually, they'll come back with recommendations. They
Yeah,
aren't the ones approved to the select board.
Right, we're not.
Right, I would have maybe just outlined it because, how is it going to be used? How is it going to be managed? So, because I'm still interested in hearing about what this group that you've put together, we voted to put together.
Yeah.
has come up with.
Right, and so this agreement is really, we tried to kind of separate this agreement out, although it will be attached to the, it'll be an attachment to the management plan, but it is a separate agreement between the town and the outdoor center. And it does, I hear that it is a little confusing, that, which pieces will be handled by which entity, but I think, to answer your question about the uses on the property, that you will be seeing a draft plan soon, so that will be,
The town retains that right?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
That control.
Okay, so, ready to move on? Section 10, fees, this section just identifies the types of activities that the outdoor center can charge fees for. They're allowed to charge fees that are reasonable to support their operations. Fees can't be charged for pedestrian use, which is defined as walking, running, snowshoeing, and sledding. That happens not in connection to any events. So if people are on the property, they're attending a Catamount Outdoor Family Center event, but they're also walking, they have to pay the event fee. But if people just come out of the property and they're walking on the property, there's no charge for that, or they're running on the property, or snowshoeing. Okay, so is that, everybody okay with that?
I'm fine with that, just I wonder if there's gonna be conflicts, potentially down the road with that. Maybe the outdoor center's interpretation of when a fee should be charged versus maybe the town's interpretation, or do you think it's sufficiently clear?
I think it's pretty clear.
I don't think you've had a conflict to date, have you?
Beg your pardon?
I don't believe there's been a conflict to date, even with how it's running now, because when they charge and don't charge. That doesn't seem like that's going to be an issue.
Well, I'm just thinking, that for instance might be, there's a running race going on, like there is,
Yeah.
every Tuesday night, but I choose to I just want to go run on the
Yeah,
property.
yeah.
And I hate it for it to be the type thing where feel like I'm being told I should buy a ticket when I'm like, wait a second, maybe I don't need to, or not a ticket, but a pass or whatever. Yeah.
You're just
Right,
like a
because I'm
runner,
not competing,
walker.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can
I just
see
use
what
that
you
as
mean.
an example.
Right, yeah, and I think there will need to be, an effort to inform people that go use the property, race nights are these nights, you might want to, walk on the other side of the road, or, just indicate what trails are being used for the races, and, just sort of encourage people to use other areas.
It does say it, not in connection to any event, so it sounds like if you were there, walking or running on a night that they were doing a race, but you weren't signed up on the roster.
Yeah.
You might have a charge, but I guess we'd have to read the whole license agreement, right?
I mean, I think, in the case where somebody wants to go there to run, and they're running the race course along with the other, I mean, I think there would be a case for charging them a fee, but,
I was going to say, I'm a runner, and if I'm running in a race, I'm running in a race, and if I'm not, I don't want to see you. I just want to run.
Yeah, I'm just,
Quietly.
and you're right, and maybe I'm being a little nitpicky here, but I just, this is kind of a unique situation. Getting back to my Heinberg Town Forest example, there are no fees ever charged there, so it never ends up being a conflict. This is kind of unique, and maybe it's just to recognize that, the uniqueness of this.
yeah, yep. Okay. Under section 11, trail closure, so basically, the town can close trails if there is degradation of natural resources due to trail abuse or muddy conditions, if there's a planned timber harvest, if we discover there's a sensitive nest or den near the trail, or other situations of trail abuse that result in the denigration of the resource. And note that we're not including any safety closures for safety reasons, because I think that would increase the town's liability exposure to kind of take any responsibility for safety closures. So we're leaving that in the hands of the trail corridor manager. And then under section 12, town reserved rights, so the town, this talks a lot about timber management, about the town's right to conduct forest management practices, and kind of, trying to minimize the disruption to recreational activities on the property, and repair any damage to the trail system that's incurred by forest management activities, and also have the right to access the property by motorized vehicles if it's necessary for maintenance or emergency purposes. Again, being careful not to to minimize the disruption to the trails, and also have the right to hold special events on the property, or to invite others to hold special events, provided that we cooperate with and give adequate notice to the outdoor center, that we hold adequate liability insurance, that we restore the area if necessary after an event. And if an event interferes with the outdoor center's use of the property, that they have the right to charge a reasonable fee if they're going to lose potential revenue loss. And the town, of course, has the right to permit free public pedestrian access with certain conditions.
Melinda, question for you. What does the town expose itself to in terms of potential liability? I understand where you've got COFC has to have insurance, but obviously, you're going to go for the deepest pocket, which would be the town. So has anybody done any research or question, or do you have any information you can give us?
Yeah, so Jennifer did some research on this. She spoke with our insurer, and they were recommending that the outdoor center increase its liability limit. It currently is at 1 million, and they were recommending that they increase it to 2 million. And nothing really, I'm trying to think if there were other red flags. I think, this wouldn't be any more liability than any other of the town properties, really.
Are we going to have and I don't mean to be nitpicky on this, but I can't help it, it's the lawyer in me. Are we going to have, is the town going to be actively involved in looking and seeing and being aware that the property is being properly maintained? Or are we relying on COFC? Because.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
See where I'm going?
I think we need, well, yeah, I think I see where you're going. I mean, I think we need to have our eye on it, but are you thinking that, if we have any oversight that we're increasing?
No, I just think I think you have to be vigilant. I mean, Ted and I can both sit there and go, it's so sue happy, and people sue over the stupidest things.
Yeah.
I would hate to see the town get embroiled over something that should have been handled by the outdoor center, that we're now going to have to absorb all kinds of fees and time getting ourselves out of, which we really have nothing to do with, but we will in fact be held liable for.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think.
Okay, I'm just,
Yeah.
you can call me off if I'm.
I also think that, that having the public have access to that property will be a benefit to us in that sense.
Oh, I
because-
completely agree. I just am worried about any undue burden on the town, especially given how sue-happy this society seems to be.
Right. Well, the reason I say that is just that I think that people are vigilant, and they, if there's any issues on our trails, they're pretty, they're not hesitant to call us up and let us know. So in that sense, you have the community's eyes looking out for it, but we also need to look out as well.
My parting comment would be, it only takes one person. So I completely agree with what you're saying, understand it, and would hope that that's the case, but it does only take that one person. So, thank you for explaining.
Sure. Okay, so basically, insurance, yes, the outdoor center has to carry adequate liability insurance, and that will be reviewed on an annual basis when the annual plan gets reviewed. And this agreement can't be assigned to a different party without permission from the town. And the outdoor center is responsible for obtaining all local, state, and federal permits as required for any activities it conducts on the property, and the town agrees to be a co-applicant where that's necessary. And let's see, section 16 is pretty self-explanatory. 17, improvements in structures. This section provides that the outdoor center can use the existing structures on the property, and that they're also responsible for the maintenance of those structures. And if they wish, if they want to make substantial capital improvements to the property, such as constructing a new building to support their recreational operations, that this will be done under a separate agreement, and any agreement will spell out things like, if either the town will agree that they will own the structure and they will share in the cost of the improvement, or if they don't agree to own the structure, the outdoor center will have to remove the building or other improvement upon termination of the license agreement. They're also responsible for maintaining the existing structures and any future structures on the property. But the town will assist them in applying for grants or support their grant applications to help cover the costs of any improvements.
What are we talking for structures right now? What structures are going to be on the town-owned property?
So currently there are 3 structures. There's 2 small sheds. I think they both house the haunted forest.
Those are in the woods.
Those are in the woods. And then there's the sheep barn, which is on Governor Chittenden Road and is being used to house the trail maintenance equipment.
snowmobile and,
Snowmobiles.
Okay, yes, okay.
And some donkeys right now, but they'll be removed. And then there's the trail kiosk also.
Oh, yeah, the trail kiosk, which is fairly new.
Yep, okay, yep.
The parking lot, so the town,
Is the house, the McCullough house, that's,
that's not gonna be on town property. Theirs.
That's not part of the deal.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's on a separate parcel, so.
is it like carved out of the middle of it?
Yeah,
Because the property kind of surrounds it, right?
Yep. Yep.
Is it just the McCullough property that's there, or is it multiple lots?
multiple lots.
There are.
Yeah, it's,
Is there
so,
any restriction on those other lots?
no,
And the McCulloughs still own them?
yeah.
Okay.
It's about 40 acres that they're retaining, and it's right along the roadside. And that was retained because its conservation value was fairly low, and by excluding those lands from the community forest, we met a federal funding requirement that the property be 75% forested, because that land that was kind of carved out was not forested, so it kind of boosted up the rest of the property to meet that requirement, so.
But it could be subdivided in the future by the McCulloughs
It
and
could be, yeah.
houses built on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, let's see, the parking lot, so the town will maintain the parking lot, and the outdoor center will be responsible for plowing. We just thought that would be a better arrangement to have them do their own plowing, and otherwise it could be a recipe for conflict, so. Lighting, the outdoor center is responsible for all costs associated with the lighting of their trail network they currently have, and the parking lot. They currently have one of their trails called the Night Trail that's just a short loop, I guess it's, I don't know, 2.5 kilometers that's lighted.
Is that for like snowshoeing and skiing, or is that in the summer too?
I think it's
It's just in the winter.
just in the winter, yeah, because it stays late enough in the summer. And let's see, herbicide, they need the town's permission to use herbicides or insecticides on the property. They need the town's permission to remove vegetation except as provided by the annual maintenance plan in the section that we previously talked about. The termination, the section called termination, it describes a mechanism by which the license agreement can be terminated in the event that either party fails to comply with the agreement. And there's a section on dispute resolution. Basically, in the case that disputes can't be resolved through informal discussions, it provides that mediation will be the next step in seeking resolution.
Can you explain an example of how the agreement would be terminated?
So, let me see. So, say the outdoor center's not keeping up their end of the agreement. So following, we identify that there's a breach of the agreement.
I mean, like I'm sorry, I mean like an example. I
Oh,
understand
an
the
example,
mechanics,
sure.
but an example for a
Well,
reason.
say that they start cutting trails without our permission, right? Then we would, we would notify them, you need to stop, and also replace the trees that you cut down. And they have 30 days to remedy that breach. And if they don't make an effort within 30 days, then we would have the ability to remove the license.
I would assume improper maintenance would also be easy grounds.
Yeah, yeah.
If they use herbicides without tolling us, it has insurance. There's lots of different areas where they could do that.
It's kind of interesting though, because the actual section in the licensing agreement, section 22, doesn't say, it's just that they get 30 days from the date of being given notice that there was a breach, they get 30 days to cure it. It doesn't really say what if it's incurable, like using herbicides or putting a trail in where it shouldn't be, but I don't think that's very likely.
There's also a grant of additional reasonable period of time, not unduly
Yeah.
withheld.
Any further questions?
Just to remind everyone, the board isn't being asked to act on this tonight.
Right.
But at some point, when we get close to the closing time, you will be asked. So if you have any objections to any of the sections, let us know sooner rather than later.
Not that
If you have things now, let us know.
I do.
Okay, good.
I look at paragraph 2 of the actual license agreement, it's on page 2. The term of the agreement, I guess, and I try really hard not to be anal retentive lawyer guy, but I didn't change before I got here, and I'm still in the suit. So I guess it kind of wears off, or comes through.
Right there with you, Counselor.
But I'm noticing that two things. One is that the agreement is going to terminate on October 31st, 2028, but the town has to send the licensee a notice not later than April 30th, 2028, providing notice of the termination date. So I'm wondering, it's kind of weird that we have to do that since it's right there. Maybe if we just give them a copy of the contract on April 30th and say, here's the contract that you signed. See, there's the date right there. I just think that's kind of weird, and I'm curious about it.
I think part of it is that October is the end of their kind of summer season. They do a lot of planning for the summer camps and whatnot, so they want to know earlier about whether the town is going to continue this relationship or not, and whether we're going to update the license, whether there's going to be changes to the license, with a lot of notice before the termination date.
That would be great. I'm not sure that that's what that does, though.
Okay.
Because that, if they want to say, the parties will commence negotiation, no later than April 30th, 2028, for renewal, that'd be fine. Giving somebody notice. Hey, remember that contract you signed? No, it's got a date in it. You may have picked up on that when you signed it, but I'm reminding you. I don't know I don't think that actually does what they want it to do. What they want is good, and I'm glad of it, but I'm not sure that's the mechanism. The other part of that, though, is actually more substantive, and that's that that is renewed for another 10-year term at the option of the licensee, not the town, provided that the town consents to such renewal, which consent shall not be unreasonably withheld so long as licensee is operating the property consistently with the terms of this agreement. Meaning that, as long as the licensee can come in and say, look, we've been doing this within the terms of the agreement, so we're gonna keep doing it under those terms, and you don't, it'd be unreasonable for you to withhold your agreement to that because we're gonna do what we've always done, and you didn't give us notice that we were violating it, so bummer. That doesn't give the town very much negotiating power. And that's, we all are wonderful and reasonable people now. 10 years from now, we're gonna be a lot older and grumpier. I'm already noticing some of that in myself. It's just gonna accelerate. But my thought is that I'm concerned that gives too much power to the licensee, whoever that may be, the actual people operating it 10 years from now. And, if there's gonna be a negotiation, it's gotta have some risk for both people on it. So I don't particularly like that clause, and don't like the position that the town would be in. I don't know what other people think about that.
I would agree. I actually don't like the idea of 10 years either, but,
Yeah, me too.
I'm-
In, one other thing before I yield is in in paragraph 13, on page 8, the licensee is obligated to have general liability insurance, which should protect the town. That's good. Town's going to be an additional insured under the policy. That's also good. Two things. One is that the next sentence, licensee shall agree not to terminate such coverage without at least 60 days prior written notification to the town. Just kind of curious about that. Why would, if they have to provide insurance, why would they also have to tell us?
Were you allowing them to switch insurers? Because then you do want to word it entirely differently.
I'm just wondering
Yeah.
why that's there.
Right.
That's a good question. I think I know why it's there, because that's standard language, and anytime you get a certificate of insurance, it always says that on the bottom of the certificate of insurance. But that doesn't mean it needs to be here.
Yeah.
Should be. If you're allowing them to switch so that they can shop their insurance, that's one thing, but I would word it differently.
And the other part of that, the whole concept here is to indemnify and hold the town harmless from any lawsuits. And I'm asking that we have an indemnity agreement, an indemnity clause in the agreement.
That's where I was
saying-
going with your insurance questions from before.
Yeah, saying that
And why we didn't have one.
that licensee will hold the town harmless and indemnify the town for any losses, costs, expenses associated with claims, damages, lawsuits.
Except for gross negligence, which can't be.
Yeah. Legal mumbo jumbo. I can just keep going. All right. So those are the things that I would ask be looked into.
What was the one we were talking about last? I would like to see that tightened up.
Which one?
Shoot. Before you started, we were on one other section. I just wanted to see it tightened up, and now I gotta find it.
What is it doing?
Section 2.
Nope, it was, sorry. I may catch it before you guys finish this thing. Don't worry about it.
You can always email that to Rick as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you think of something after tonight's meeting, you still have an opportunity to make changes.
I don't have legal feedback, obviously, but my feedback is I was a little surprised by this, I guess, just by being told that, we're going to continue to run this, or you're not going to get the property. And my first inclination, okay, keep the property. But, And so, that's just a knee-jerk reaction to being told that now we have conditions, because I don't remember us discussing those conditions before. I mean, I look at, a caretaker of the property, it's a property that the town is, I think, using money from several, I don't know how many years, to purchase, along with grants and.
URF and.
Right. Well, we put another $200,000 into the fund this year, right? So we're spending a lot of taxpayer money, and we're being told to, one of the conditions is to give it to somebody else to take care of. And the town really has no say in, like Ted has pointed out astutely, that we have a little power. They can continue to do this forever, as long as they don't go outside the terms of the agreement. So I guess I have a general problem with the way that's done, and I'm not sure that was the intent when we heard all the presentations, I guess a year ago or more. So I guess I have to wrap my head around that first, because it's kind of a surprise. And from a financial perspective, I just wonder what the townspeople will think. What if the fees for mountain biking go up, I don't know, triple, because they want to build a night, and I'm not saying they would do this, right? Certainly I wouldn't think Jim McCullough, he's ran that place on Threadbare for many years, but I heard that they have big ideas, so if they want to do a lot of improvements and charge more money, and townspeople are like, hey, we bought this, why does it now cost me $10 a day instead of $6 or $5 or $4, and why didn't the price go down because we bought it?
So the town does have approval over the fees every year.
It does, okay.
And it also, in the conservation easement, it says that the fees need to be reasonable, so Vermont Land Trust and Vermont Housing Conservation Board, because they are approvers of the management plan, and the management plan has to provide for the fees in it, so they could say these fees are too high for general public usage. You're not equally providing access to all members of the general public.
And lastly, I just think of it, it's a town property, so it feels like it wouldn't be as much of a town-owned or run property if we turn it over. And I don't know if we'll have questions about, I think the people, this is a nonprofit, so, but the people draw salaries, right?
I assume.
At what point does the director's salary of the town-owned forest become so high that we start hearing complaints, well, why are we having this situation where taxpayers bought the property, and now the director of this thing is turning into a $250,000. Not that it would, but I'm just, I'm sure that's way outside the bounds of, but I'm just wondering whether those questions will eventually come up, and then I like the idea of 5 years, we see how it goes, and see what comments we get from the public as well, from the standpoint, if we do buy it, what's the feedback on what we're using it for? And when I think when we first started, one of the comments I made when we did our, election discussions and some of the big topics for the town, it just seemed inappropriate to buy a mountain biking center. Is that what we're doing now? We're buying the Catamount Family Center to buy a mountain biking center, if it's going to stay. It's kind of what I think of Catamount as. I think that's what people think. It's a mountain biking center. Is that what it's going to be? It's going to be a mountain biking center that the town owns, or for a fee mountain biking center that the town owns.
On that point, if you don't mind, I view Catamount as so much more than
Okay.
a mountain biking center. Yeah, mountain biking is probably what it's best known for.
Sure, right.
So what's kind of neat about it, it's what it's not best known for, because sometimes you kind of get it to yourself. So
You're a neighbor.
I am biased, I'm a neighbor, I'm biased, that's absolutely correct. But it is a resource that I think is so much more than the mountain biking. It's just the mountain biking, for some reason, seems to be what everybody thinks of, but I would argue it's so much more.
I did find the section I wanted to see tightened up, and that was termination under 22, particularly with regard to noncompliance. I'd like to see that tightened up and much more definitive.
Do you have language suggestions, or?
We want a bunch of legal jumbo? Hang on, let's see. I take, probably, I have more problems with the last part of the sentence, which is if the breaching party commences good faith efforts to cure the alleged noncompliance and such noncompliance cannot be cured within such 30 days, such non-breaching party shall have an additional reasonable period. I would like all of that tightened up so that here's what it is, you don't cure it, here's what the remedy or result or fine is going to be. I don't like extensions of time, reasonable periods of time, because I find that they get abused. Sorry.
So I'll try to be brief. I'm not, just to, if you will, add to a little bit what Terry was saying. My preference would have been, the town was able to use some sort of competitive process, and through that process, Catamount Outdoor Center was chosen. And then we went ahead and see if we could negotiate a license agreement with them. But I think that, for lack of better words, that concern, if you will, is certainly overridden by the concern of potentially losing this sale. And to be quite honest, having a fair amount of faith in not only the town and ability to negotiate a license, but in Catamount Center, Outdoor Center, the folks there themselves. And then the other point.
I'd have to just throw this out there, though. If the town doesn't buy it, who is going to buy it?
Well,
They're not going to sell it and have it developed. The idea is to preserve it. So their pool of buyers is relatively small. I think we actually can push back a little bit harder than we have.
But isn't there a scenario where some sort of a developer could purchase it and
They could,
subdivide it?
But they're not, I don't think there's any intention of the family to consider that at this point in time. I don't think
And that's
that was-
probably true, but Jim and Lucy, you know, God bless them, aren't going to be here forever, you know, I mean, maybe in the short term that's true, the long term, maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what else to add. And then the part about the fees, yeah, again, I'm biased, but there isn't the marketplace going to play a role in this also?
It will, so I know, I agree with that, but I'm just
Enough said
wondering
then.
what the, what the improvements would be. And, you know, when we were talking about this, and, you know, I was trying to think of uses for all town members, and would somebody want a pavilion there, or does all this Catamount Outdoor Family Center, you know, management preclude us from doing any improvements to the area? I'm just trying to think of what the
There was a
town,
section in there that specifically said we could add our thoughts to it.
I mean, we'd have to work with the nonprofit, because if it's right in the middle of their main trail, or not.
no,
can't have
of course, I'm trying to be practical, right? But,
That is a good point, and I hadn't thought of that. It's, and I'll just see what your reaction to this is it's kind of the question of who is in control? Is it the town, or is it Catamount Outdoor Center?
It's the select board,
should be the
you
town.
guys. I mean, ultimately, the management plan is what is guiding, you know, the 10-year plan for the property, and that is completely up to the select board to approve or change, and the license is just one part of that. I mean, the license has to follow the management plan has to follow the easement, but ultimately, it's the select board that is in control of the property. And and just to kind of speak to your concern about, you know, when we first presented this project, what I heard from the select board, from the planning commission, from the conservation commission was the town doesn't have the capacity or desire to manage this property. And we are fairly happy with the amount of opportunities that Catamount Outdoor Family Center has brought to our residents and to all of Chittenden County in terms of little kids camps and races and getting people outdoors. And we want to explore how we can partner together. And that was kind of how this project first started, was the intent of the town to partner with Kanima Outdoor Family Center and develop this exact agreement.
I don't know if there was that much of a link, but I think that was discussed for sure. I think maybe some people were wondering, how it was going to be managed and wanted to see a plan or proposals on how it would be managed. It seems like we have a very focused single thread forced by the owners right now. So, I mean, we have to, I think Ted and Joy, and Jeff brought up some good points. I think maybe we have to noodle on it. I don't want to, because it was kind of a surprise to me. I don't want to make any knee-jerk reaction call on it, and we're not voting on it tonight. So I think we have to think about it. And I don't know if engineering, you have these ideas of, is there a way we can think about legally this agreement from a, I was trying to explain it earlier, this is the,
Process standpoint almost.
yeah, so you have, this controls the, what you do at the center, and this is run by the select board. And this piece of the agreement is what defines how it's being maintained. And so, I don't know, just something that would make it clearer on how we're structuring this.
And, I mean, I hear your concerns about this being complicated in a lot of ways, and I share those. I mean, it is complicated. It's not, it's, there's a lot of pieces.
We have two really smart lawyers here, so I mean,
You're
getting old and grumpy,
not
but at
going
least
to be
one
able
of
to
them.
bind somebody up in a legal, I mean, you could do that all day long, but every legal document has loopholes that you can find ways around. So that's not the mechanism for doing that. I mean, we can get it as clear as we can get it.
We've received some pretty good comments here tonight as far as things to work on, and as far as coming up with some better way of visually maybe describing how this, is that kind of what you're getting at, Teresa?
Well, I was just thinking of, I'm going to go through it. I only went through the letter. I didn't go through the full license agreement, so I need to look at that further. I'm used to looking at contracts, but I'm not as fast as an attorney, of course, so.
We may be able to come up with something to more visually describe the interrelationship to the various pieces.
And I agree with Joy 100% that I think we have more leverage than is implied here, so.
So we need to move on. Good comments tonight, and thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Let's move on to the Green Mountain Masonic Center agreement. Rick, I presume you're going to talk about
I have Eric.
Eric, okay.
Good evening, everyone. What's up, Planning Commission?
We do have a member from the Masonic.
Busy man tonight.
I'm from the Masonic Center. Yes, my name's John Leskowitz. I'm the president of the executive board of the Masonic Center and also one of the board of trustees. So,
Provide some background for the board. So back in 2013, so I guess I'll back up for a second. We received a letter from the board of the Green Mountain Masonic Center in January asking for an exemption from property taxes. So back in 2013, the town received the same request. And what the town did then was approved a 5-year agreement that would provide granted funds to the Masonic Center that they would then use for municipal property taxes. That was in 2013. It was a 5-year agreement. It's 2018, so that agreement is up for possible renewal tonight. So at the time, I went back just to look at the discussion that took place in 2013. The town took this action as opposed to putting out to a public vote to exempt the property because although it met the statute for municipal exemption for the use of the center, it did not meet the state tax exempt status that would exempt it from the education grant list. So if the property was exempt, voted by the people of town to be exempt from taxes, the town would need to make up the money to the education fund. That amount last year was $10,500. Current municipal taxes last tax year were $1,820. I asked Town Assessor Bill Hinman, hey, has anything changed the last 5 years since this was looked at the state level, and nothing had changed. That would still apply in this circumstance. The question for the board tonight, would be asking if you want to renew this agreement for additional 5 years or a term you deem as appropriate. With the information here, I've shared it with John. John shared it with the trustees. They're in support of it. John's here as well to answer any questions you have about the organization today.
Any questions for John or for Eric?
So what's the difference between the state exemption and the town exemption?
I know one piece that meets the state statutes for the town exemption, and then I'm not exactly sure of the mechanism for the education fund. I went to the assessor for that piece, but he said it wouldn't meet those thresholds that the state has set there.
When this was adopted 5 years ago, the idea was to try to stay away from calling it a tax break, because the select board actually can't do that. And so the mechanism that was selected was to provide a grant that was roughly equivalent to the taxes. And that solved the problem. And that's what this agreement was intended to do.
Okay. And I understand the concept of the school taxes. I guess where I get a little hung up is the school tax is a school issue, not a town issue.
Actually, that's not entirely true. The town is responsible for collecting those school taxes. And even if we don't collect 100% of it, we have to give 100% to the state.
Right. So that in turn becomes a sorry, I can't say.
Town liability.
Town liability. In other words, town taxes have to be used to make up the difference.
Correct.
I shouldn't say town taxes, but that's, town revenue.
So if you're interested in doing this.
Is has legal counsel given us an opinion on it?
At the time, not recently, we didn't ask, but at the time, yes.
Well, the reason I'm asking, I emotionally, I'm in favor of this. The issue that I'm having is that I don't want to play lawyer when I'm a select board person, but I have a nagging recollection of a Supreme Court decision that basically said that there's not a charitable exemption allowed in this circumstance. And I'm wondering if we could delay on this.
That is why we went the grant route, because it's a separate entity. It's not tied directly to taxes. There's a relationship, but it's not.
A grant instead.
All right.
So we.
So you're essentially providing a grant to a nonprofit.
What was the reason, Ted, for not allowing a tax exemption? What was the?
Well, the select board doesn't have the authority to give it an exemption. It has to go town vote, as I understand it.
Yeah.
But I was referring to the Supreme Court decision. What was the?
There was, and again, no offense to the organization, but my recollection was that there was a decision where the lodge was not considered to be a charity or fraternal organization under the statute that applies here because of the way that the definition was applied. And I'm quite sure it's out there, but if we're not doing we'd have, the statute would say we'd have to put it up to a town vote anyway, which we're not doing. And so, all right. So can I ask, procedurally, do we actually give the organization money, or do we just not collect their tax?
We give them money.
Right.
I think it's before August 1st of the year, of the fiscal year, they get a payment.
And how much?
1800. Which
But-
they turn around and pay back. So it's a wash.
Right, but the part I get confused, and I'm sorry about this, is I see the 1,800, which is in the proposed agreement, but I'm on the think it's the second to last paragraph in the town manager's report, where it mentions an amount of $10,624. And what I want to make sure I understand is the town, in addition to the 1,800 that's part of this agreement, going to be liable for that amount, $10,624 a year, to pay to the state?
We
No.
would just be granting the municipal tax portion.
Okay.
The organization would pay the education
So
property
your,
tax.
your
Our understanding,
organization,
that's the operating principle we've been working towards the last 5 years.
then that I did not understand, and I appreciate the clarification. And it also very much helps my decision.
Yeah, I mean, the number has changed over the last 5 years, but what you're
Sure it
using,
has.
what you're using today is, that's correct. We pay that, the school tax amount.
Okay.
So if you're comfortable with pursuing this tonight, there is a motion suggested.
I'd move to authorize the town manager to sign a grant agreement between the town and the Green Mountain Masonic Center for a term starting July 1, 2018 and ending August 1, 2022.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
So, can I ask, just what are the rules for granting tax exemption? You know, this, basically, I know you're doing a grant, but essentially what you're doing is giving a tax exemption, right? I mean, that's essentially, at the end of the day, what you're doing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you've mechanically done it differently to go around a vote. But what are our rules for doing that? And how do we decide what organizations get those things and which do not? So can you help us understand what those rules are? Is it just that somebody comes in, like John, from a good organization and says, hey, I want you guys to cut my tax bill? And I'm just trying to understand.
32 VSA, 3840 first, and then keep going from there. Because the law is laid out in 32 VSA, 3840, which is mentioned in the manager's report.
But I'm trying to go back to what Ted said, that the reason we're doing the grant is because there's somebody decided that that organization isn't suitable for this particular law. So is there,
If I could understand your question, I know there are tax exempt entities in Williston. Some of those are specifically addressed by state statute, so they automatically are tax exempt. Those that are not specifically tax exempt by state statute, how did they get their, for lack of better words, tax exempt status from the town? Would anybody know? And the answer may be there are none.
I'm trying to think of.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't ask that to stump anybody. It does seem like a legitimate question.
yeah, I'm just trying to understand, because churches, I think, maybe places of worship have some tax exempt by law status.
I can't say it doesn't address that question, but there are other organizations that the town has given grants to in the past. So this is not the only one that it gives a grant to.
So it would be on a case-by-case basis.
Right. But that doesn't answer the broader question about,
How do we decide, right? Other than,
Yeah.
how do we make that decision? Are there any rules that are driving us or guiding us, or?
I guess the answer to that is yes, the state statutes is what guides us. Because if the state statutes say it's not exempt, then that puts the town at risk for declaring an exemption, because then it's going to have to pay the school side of those taxes. And in those cases, we've tried to avoid that. We don't want to be in the position of having to pay the state education taxes for an entity just because we want to grant them a municipal,
Right,
the municipal
right.
taxes. So that practice has been to find other ways, if the board wants to do that, of trying to help that organization out. There are generally not a lot of those types of situations. but there have been some others, and I'd have to spend a lot of time researching it, because I just don't recall what they were.
I can give you an example of another lodge in Jericho, Vermont, that went through a similar process through the town vote process. The town select board there actually decided that they would put up their tax exemption for vote with the understanding that the school tax would increase for the general population to offset the entire tax abatement for that property. And that was put up for a vote, and it was actually passed. But the difference was it involved a lot less money. It was on the order of $2,500 for the entire bill. So we're talking closer to $14,000, which was probably not as an easy figure to live with. So the process does work, but I don't know if that has to do with Jericho rules or state rules, but it is.
The town would have to follow the
Yeah,
same process.
right.
It's like somebody's looking at state statute right now.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is there a time crunch on this?
I think June, right? Because
Yeah, so I think the board has some time if you want.
I would ask if we could get legal opinion on it. I just,
That, specifically on which issue?
well, if, yeah. That's a good point. I'm pausing because there are two distinct issues, and I'm not sure. One is, does the, is it a lodge, is that the proper term?
well, in this case, we're actually a licensed business entity, so we're called Green Mountain Masonic Center, because there are several lodges that meet in that building. So it's, and the case I mentioned to you in Jericho was a much smaller facility, and it was a single lodge.
Okay.
And that- which is why there's a big difference in the dollar amounts we're talking about as well.
This isn't related to that necessarily, but the town rents space from them as well on occasion for senior programs.
Okay. All right, so, I'm sorry, could you say that the town does what with the?
We rent space from them for our some of our senior programs.
I guess what I'm wondering is if the entity does not qualify as a charity or fraternal organization relative to the tax exemption statute, are we legally allowed to give them a grant to pay their taxes? And as I think about it, we're talking about $1,000 a year?
2,000,
$2,000
1,800, yeah.
So that's the legal question, but as a policy question, sir, I'm wondering if you can beef up with what the entity does for
Sure,
the
so,
public good.
yeah, we're a nonprofit organization. We own the building that is behind where CVS is. And primarily, the main purpose of the building is to promote different Masonic activities related to Masonic lodges and appendant bodies. And so there are two Masonic lodges that meet there, as well as Eastern Star and York Rite and Scottish Rite. And they all have similar teachings. The main premise of the organization is to improve a person's life quality and to improve and one of the tenets of doing that is that community service is that. So we are not a philanthropy. We do not collect money and then redistribute it, but in part of improving people's moral character, working with the community is part of the tenets of that organization. So there are those bodies as well. But since we do have a facility that is not used 24 hours a day, we actually allow the Cub Scouts to meet in our facility. We have the Williston seniors meeting in our facility. I know the Williston Food Shelf has contracted out to use our facility for a food demonstration at some point later in the year. And any other organization that has nonprofit motives, we would also consider. In most cases, we just ask for a contribution, and we don't call it a rent because it's just really to offset the cleaning and utility expenses associated with the use of the facility. So, and we have no employees, we don't run any business out of the organizations, no products leave there, so it's all, a nonprofit entity. Is that enough, or?
Yeah, it is for me.
So procedurally, we're not going to vote on the motion, a motion to table.
I was going to say, motion to table, so moved.
And second, that's not a debatable issue. All those in favor of tabling the issue for tonight, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we'll reconsider this at some other time. Okay, thank you. Moving on to the memorandum of understanding with the Howard Center. Rick?
Yes, that's mine. This is the next step in the process of having counselors work with our police department in addressing various issues that come up during the course of their day that really are more suitably addressed by people with counseling background rather than law enforcement. And you may recall that there are 4 counselors that are being hired by the Howard Center and actually have been hired. The money is in the budget for this, and these 4 counselors will be providing service to 6 communities. And so this agreement is intended to implement the program that's already underway at this point.
Questions for Rick regarding this?
The only question I had is, I noticed that they require space be provided, I assume in the police station,
Yes,
and that's,
yes,
We're
we
good
already
with
have
that?
it set up.
okay.
The idea is that they won't actually be using it very often, but they do need a place to sit with a computer and a telephone. And then the idea is they'll be out in the field more than they'll be at the desk.
Okay.
But there are times when you need to access to a phone and a computer.
Okay. That was it for me.
If you're, is there more discussion? A motion is in order.
I move to authorize the town manager to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Howard Center for the development and operation of the community outreach program.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to liquor license applications, renewals. Rick?
I've got this one. So this is the annual liquor license renewals for the town. In your packet, you have a list of all of the licenses submitted to the clerk's office. They've been reviewed by staff. There's been no recent violations of these licenses. Looking for the board to approve them for the next year, which starts on May the 1st.
So there's no changes to the status, the same license, same, and no, like you said, no violations?
No violations. I believe one place may have not submitted for this year, just they didn't want to do service.
They're all in.
they're all-
I know,
I think it
I'm
was
sorry.
the Gardner's Supply Store.
Yeah, a Garden of Eden
Garden of Eden.
decided to forego a license this year.
No liquor there?
I think they had any before, did they? Beer?
Yeah, they did. On and off. There's a new restaurant too opening up that'll be coming in a little bit later, I'm sure. I think it's Pizza Hut or, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
The motion is in order if there is no more questions.
I'd move to approve the liquor license applications for the year beginning May 1, 2018 and ending April 30, 2019, as listed on the application since dated March 12, 2018.
Second.
Discussion on motion.
Everything, it's the thing where we have to sign, like,
We don't have to do that anymore.
oh,
The
man.
board delegated that to the town clerk.
Then I wholeheartedly,
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to local emergency operations plan for 2018.
Yep, and this is another housekeeping item, one of those annual things for the board to approve. This is our emergency management plan. It lists emergency contacts, people who would run emergency shelters, kind of where our vulnerable populations would be, daycare centers, that type of thing. It's looked to be approved by May the 1st every year. Fire chief carried the ball on this, just had some minor updates over the last year. Just looking for a motion from the board to approve the plan. Chief Morton recommends approval.
Under the select board chairperson, if you would eliminate my work telephone number, I'm not there anymore.
I thought we did that years ago.
Should have done
Get that
last year.
changed.
Let's try it again this year. Any questions for Rick regarding the emergency operations?
Sorry, one minor thing, it's not gonna affect my vote, that's for sure. I'm on in the memo, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph down, the last sentence, which reads, once adopted, the LEOP must be signed by a select board member, the town manager, or mayor, certifying that they have taken, at a minimum, and then these 2 ISC trainings.
I have,
You have?
yes.
Well, then my question is answered.
I have a certificate on my wall just to
Okay.
verify that.
Yeah. Now, is he also pushing that we have a mayor form of government? No.
Any further questions for you on that? Motion's in order.
Move to approve the 2018 Local Emergency Operations Plan.
Is there a second? Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Moving on to the redetermination request in regard to the common level of appraisal. We did get,
So the board authorized an appeal of the determination, initial determination by the state. And their initial determination was the CLA would be 95.26%. And staff looked at this and found that seemed awfully low, given that we fairly recently did a reappraisal. And all our numbers show that our reappraisal is still pretty accurate in terms of market value sales. So we did file an appeal, and lo and behold, the state agreed with us. So they raised it up to just under 98%, 97.92%. And this has been reviewed by our assessor and listers, and they recommend that the board accept this. If the board doesn't accept it, then a hearing will be held shortly. And I don't know, we don't have any arguments at this point because they've kind of agreed with our position, but that's
So
the process.
this is the number we were looking at, or we had some way to figure out that this is where we should land?
Yeah, if anything, it's a little bit higher than, so.
Throw us a bone.
any questions for Rick regarding this?
And the coefficient of dispersion is not an issue.
Oh, goodness, no, that's really low.
Okay.
Very, very good. Anything under 10%, I think, generally, they
Okay.
If there's no more questions, the motion is in order.
Move to accept the revised common level of appraisal set at 97.92% for fiscal year 2019 and authorize the chair of the select board to sign the stipulation.
Second.
Discussion on the motion. If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Moving on to the Stormwater Program Agreement Amendment. Rick, is that you?
No, that's Eric.
Eric, okay.
We're tag teaming it tonight.
So this is something from the Regional Planning Commission. It's an amendment, minor amendment to the intermunicipal MS4 Stormwater Program Agreement to make it align with state law. The current agreement precludes the RPC from charging for indirect costs incurred in this program. Under state law, a Regional Planning Commission cannot use municipal funds or grants to cover costs of providing services under a service agreement, like this is an intermunicipal service agreement. Because the original agreement precluded charging for indirect associated costs, the RPC has been subsidizing this with other funds. So this is asking to authorize this amendment to this agreement to come in compliance with state law. Memo from Charlie Baker, the RPC Executive Director, was included in the packet here. They're asking every town that's a part of this agreement to approve this amendment to make it effective on July 1st.
Questions for Rick?
Well, Eric,
Either one.
I have to admit that this issue went over my head, so I'm going to rely on your opinion that it's in the town's best interest to agree to this.
Yep, I would say so. We want to be in compliance with state law, so.
Okay.
Any further questions? Motion again is in order.
I'd move to authorize the town manager to sign the Chittenden County M54 Stormwater Program is amended with an effective date of July 1, 2018.
MS4.
Is there a second?
MS4, excuse me.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Moving on to the Chittenden County Public Safety Authority Agreement.
And this one's me.
Okay.
Since I was on the joint survey committee, I should probably follow through on this stage of it. This really is a follow-through on what was approved by the voters of Williston. We asked the voters to consider whether or not Williston should join the Public Safety Authority, and their vote was in favor. So this is the agreement that I previously shared with the board, and we had several meetings where we talked about this agreement in length. And I'm just looking for authorization, final authorization.
Any questions for Rick on this?
And if I remember correctly, you gave a synopsis at town meeting, and the information meeting. It does not commit us to joining it, it only,
Well, it commits us to being a member of the authority. It does not commit us to receiving any service or paying for any service.
Right.
That's a
Okay.
separate
Great. Thank you.
decision that the board will have at some point in the future.
Clock. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It may be sooner than we think, because remember, our fire dispatch is done by the town of Shelburne. This now gives us an option that we didn't have before. So we'll have to evaluate that as soon as things get up and running. But I imagine it's probably going to be at least a year, maybe more, before things are fully operational.
So how many years now are we? Is it 3 years we have to take action? Or basically do something or you're out, right, basically?
Yeah, there is
3
certain
years?
years, I don't recall exactly.
It
but-
wasn't very long, so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think so too, Terry. So, one of the things, as I saw and read all the election results from all the towns, is it Shelburne?
Yes.
And Essex, is that,
Well, Essex didn't vote on it.
Essex didn't vote, but for a reason, obviously, and Shelburne voted against it, is that it?
That's correct.
And there was an awful lot of, and hopefully we have this discussion at some point here about, I think we heard all the pro side. What are the con sides? Why would I was very surprised that the dispatchers themselves were picketing against it. Because I thought when at least early on, I thought we heard that, and maybe this isn't contractual yet, but I thought we heard that the dispatchers would get first right of refusal, and this was really something to better their careers because you were going to give them more opportunity for upward movement than they have today because they're in such small pools in each one of these stations. So why would they be so up in arms? Because just moving from Colchester to,
They're losing positions.
Well, not necessarily.
Some.
Not necessarily, but here's why
didn't know
the,
that, so.
first of all, the dispatchers were posed at this first stage for reasons I don't fully understand, because this first step doesn't commit anything to anyone.
Right, but it starts the ball rolling, and usually when these balls start rolling, they don't
But
stop.
what they were arguing is they didn't have details, well, the operational details. Well, of course, that's not possible until you form an organization. And the towns were in the awkward position of, the unions wanted to negotiate now, the details. Well, we can't negotiate until you have an entity. And
So there's no change of status from a union perspective for these employees, or does this regional dispatch change their, I don't know, their status in any way, or their negotiating
Not yet.
power, or? Okay.
it will change if there is a regional dispatch that's up and running, because then the employees of that will not longer be employees of individual municipalities. And they will have to decide whether or not they want to unionize. And if they do, then they will have to decide and negotiate what their benefits are. And they wanted that up front, because they wanted assurances to know
Of
what
course,
they were.
in today's environment, I can understand.
And there's another element too. There are some people who enjoy working for their current employer. And this will mean that they may not be able to do that.
Okay.
So those are some of the reasons.
Okay, that's good to know. I was actually just surprised. I was surprised that Shelburne, who has a center, voted against it. So in effect, will that center continue to run as it is today then?
Well, it'll continue to run, whether or not all the people or agencies they currently serve stay with them is a different matter. I suspect most will, because many of the agencies they serve are actually outside of Chittenden County. There are some inside Chittenden County, Williston being one. I think they also do some police dispatching for Heinsberg, and I don't know what else. But anyway, Williston's probably the largest account that may or may not move. We'll have to see. And, that'll be a point to evaluate in the future, but that's a whole different step in the process.
Any other questions for Rick? Motion again is in order.
I'd move to authorize the town manager to sign the agreement to create the Chittenden County Public Safety Authority on or after April 6th, given the majority of the voters approved the ballot item as certified by the town clerk on town meeting day 2018.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Managers report.
I have a question before that.
Yep.
The vote we just took, did we have to make that motion? Didn't the town vote for it, and so that's just the way it is?
I was torn on that one, but I felt that it would be best to have the select board weigh in on it.
I'm just curious, like, if we said no after the town voted for it, I mean, do we get impeached?
I was wondering the same thing.
Just, anyway, all right, but
I don't know.
it never came up. So,
Where are you going with this, Ted?
just wondering how much power I have. Disregard town meeting votes and just do, whatever.
I wasn't the only manager who was wondering on this, because, I've been in touch with all the other men, and they were all doing the same thing we're doing here, so.
Err on the side of caution.
Okay, well, just curious, thank you.
So, manager's report, I had several things to talk about here. Under the written report, the first item is the financial report. We are about 66% through the year, and expenditures are slightly higher than that, but that's because some of the items like debt service are 80% or 100%. I'm sorry, let's see. Line these up correctly. Well, the Environmental Reserve Fund, we paid 100%, debt service 80%, transfer. So some of those items, 100%, and therefore it throws off the percentage a little bit. But I think overall, we're well within budget. Some of the departments, like police, are only at 57%. Again, that's because of the ongoing problem we've had with not being able to fill positions. I know the chief is aggressively working to fill those, and in fact, I interviewed someone today for one of the positions. Good. So he is making progress. And I'm trying to think if there's any other things. We're still, we have another, let's see, on the revenue side, rooms and meals, we still have another couple payments to be made on that. But as you saw from our last report, we're probably going to be over on that. In other words, we see more revenue than we had budgeted for that line item. When someone mentioned how we're doing on the highway, well, winter's not over yet. Well, I should say winter season isn't over. Winter may be over, but winter season is not necessarily over. But I think overall we're going to be okay for the year in the highway department. We found that our new building for holding sand came in handy because some communities were struggling to keep up their stores of salt this year. I'm sorry, I said sand, but we were not having a problem because we have adequate storage in our new building. So I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any on that report.
Remind me what when's the fiscal year over?
June 30th. All right, moving along here, the next item I wanted to touch on is the town attorney search. I think I may have mentioned before that Joe Fallon, who is legal counsel of the town for, I don't know, how long, but more than 20 years, is retiring at the end of this calendar year. And so I would like to set up a process for selecting a replacement. And what I've suggested is that we engage a panel of 3 individuals, one being a select board member. The second person would be the director of public works, because of all our department heads. On general legal matters, he has the most contact with legal counsel. And the final person would be me, because I also have quite a bit of contact. This is just for general legal issues. Labor relations is handled by a different legal counsel. And we also use a different attorney for zoning-related issues. So this is just for general, and a lot of times it has to do with property, either property sales, property purchases, rights of way, but there are some other things, tax appeals, sometimes we'll use this legal counsel for those kinds of things. And Ted has agreed to serve on this committee, and being an attorney, I thought that he'd bring a good perspective to the process. So unless there's any objections, we will proceed with that process and bring back a recommendation to the select board at some point before the end of the calendar year.
Thank you, Ted.
All right, moving along, hearing no objections. First constable is a position that's elected, and this past election, no one ran for the opening, and there were no insufficient write-in votes. So the position currently is unfilled. We do have someone who recently submitted an application to serve as constable. And so we have not advertised for that position.
We
And so
have a second person, actually, who may want to apply then.
Well, so the question is, should we go through the normal application process? Given this elected position, we're just wondering, because people had an opportunity back in January to submit a petition for this and didn't, so. But we'll be happy to do that if the board wants. And there's still, we're not obviously proposing any people tonight, so we still have, if someone wants to get an application in, we can still accept that. That's not an issue. But the question is, do we go through the full notification process?
Can I ask 2 things? What are the duties of the town constable?
It's another thing in there.
Oh,
There was
That
a
outlined
long
it.
thing
Yeah, it
that
was a really
talks about what the constable can do. Essentially, it's serving papers.
Okay.
It's no law enforcement.
like a sheriff?
Sort of, but has no law.
Okay, so like a sheriff serving and, okay.
Sort of.
And 2, when somebody doesn't run for an office, the board has the ability to just appoint somebody?
Yes.
Okay.
Until the next
Now,
election.
this is a position that isn't critical. I mean, there's been years where it hasn't been filled. Just because no one ran and no one applied, so, and we didn't really advertise it. But in this case, someone decided they were interested. And this isn't the first time this has happened either. One time it was open and someone said, hey, I'd like to be constable, so the board interviewed them and appointed that person. But that person, I guess, lost interest after a term or 2. And
Do they get paid?
sorry.
Do they get paid?
They
So
can
it's a-
charge for the people they're serving the papers for. Reasonable fee. Yeah, it's fine. Is there a town agent?
Question.
We got rid of those?
Yes.
I was elected town agent in Richmond. That's my first municipal experience. I thought it was like sort of James Bond type thing, but it turned out it's just waiting for somebody to give you legal papers.
So the question is, do we want to advertise it?
If you don't mind, I think the question is, do we want to fill it? And then
Well, there are people that are
There's
interested
people
in
that are
it, so we
interested,
would.
so yes. So now it becomes a matter, do you just take what you have, or do you publicly make notice of it in case there's anybody else?
Just because people are interested, doesn't convince me that we ought to have
True.
town constable.
How does the work get done?
It's just somebody will contact them and say, here, a summons and complaint to serve on Joe Schmo. And they go out and do it, and they fill out a return of service saying under oath that they actually gave the person the papers.
No, I'm sorry,
Oh,
that would be the constable's job, but what happens when we don't have one? How does that
the
job get
sheriff-
done?
The sheriff does it.
Sheriff does it, and you pay a lot more money.
Oh,
It's still not a lot of money, but I think it's fine.
Well, then Jason should cry when he
Yeah.
serves on it.
There's no law enforcement.
Yeah. Then if we are gonna have it, then I think we do need to, advertise.
I was actually gonna disagree, so I was gonna say.
No, please do.
But just for discussion, I was gonna say, it was up for an election, there were a bunch of write-ins, but nobody actually got, I was in there counting them, nobody actually got very many, maybe a couple, if even a handful. If somebody's volunteering, why not? Why not just,
We should open up the process anyway to
Because I think
to
people
other
didn't realize
folks.
that they could do that.
Right.
And so
Okay.
therefore, you
That's
need
fair.
including
Right.
somebody.
that's fair.
Or if the person who volunteered wrote down his name because he wanted to, and so we have to, other people might have done the same thing, said, I'm putting my name down, hopefully other people put my name
Okay,
down, so,
good point.
yeah, I think. we
Open
have
it up and then interview and, okay.
to- Yep.
All right, we'll advertise. Moving along here, I just wanted to share with you a nice little thank you note I got from Bill White.
Oh, yes.
I have some, we had another flood. This one was much smaller and was caused by human error. It involved the fire department on the second floor. Someone left water running in the bucket, and when they started the process, they were there, and then a fire call came in.
I'm not laughing like it's funny, but, yes, that would happen, wouldn't
So
it?
there was some damage, but they were on it, actually, even before the people who went on the call got back from the call, it was already being addressed. And so it's not a huge amount of damage, but, the important thing is they got to it right away, they're drying it out, and they have to pull up some floor tiles, and some ceiling tiles need to be replaced, and that's about it. So,
Any chance someday we will actually see this? I mean, maybe during the summer when it's nice.
Oh, the
and
bicycle
warm,
thing?
we can-
Yeah.
I would actually like to see it, and I also I like Ted's idea of seeing one of the municipal things, infrastructures we support, and we talked about water or sewer, it would be kind of cool to see that at some point. So I just don't want to forget that for
you
the,
may want to do it in the spring before,
Well-
because it can get hot up there. But yes, we can arrange that.
It's a neat setup. I got a tour about a month ago. Tried it out.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a hike, but I'm sure.
which one is that?
The bicycle to wind the clock.
Yeah. Can't be much of a hike.
Well, climb-
Just to get up there.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I want to see the bucket of rocks.
It's impressive.
Okay, moving along here, the final thing on our manager report is mixed feelings, but I have a letter of resignation from Ken Beliveau. He is, he's retiring the end of, early August, so we have a little bit of time, but he's announcing that tonight to the planning commission.
Yeah.
And so here's this letter. So we'll have an opening here to fill.
Oh, shoot.
Is he retiring? Is he moving, or is he?
No, he's staying, he lives in Waterbury, he's staying. He's been here 10 years, so. And that's all I have for this evening.
Is there any other business before we go into executive session? Hearing no other business, then a motion would be in order to go into executive session for the performance evaluation of the manager.
So moved.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We will now in executive session. We'll move downstairs to conduct that.